Please do sit down. Good morning to everybody. We're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 1 together this morning. Let's pray briefly as we come to this passage. Father, as we start a new book in your word, we pray, please open our eyes, open our minds, open our hearts, and then fill them with your word. Fill us with your spirit and help us to see Jesus as we look at Proverbs 1. And we ask it in his name. Amen. Pride and vanity have ruined many a cobbler's dog. True knowledge is to know that you know what you know and to know that you do not know what you do not know. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. There's a bad potato in every sack. A hungry stomach has no ears. The spoonmaker's children often have the worst spoons. Proverbs. And you can find a proverb about pretty much anything. And brilliantly, there is a book in the Bible which is rammed full of them. One of the Proverbs I've just read out comes from the Bible, and you can tell me which one it is on the way out. Proverbs is a book which we're going to be taking a look at over the summer months in our morning services. So let me introduce Proverbs to you very briefly with 3 introductory comments. So here's introductory comment number 1. The book of Proverbs is made up of 2 parts. Part 1 is Proverbs chapter 1 to chapter 9. Part 2 is Proverbs chapter 10 to chapter 31. Now, part 2, 10 to 31, is the most familiar part of the book. And with the exception of the odd chapter or 2, the odd bit here and there, it's full of quick-fire proverbs about a bewildering range of all kinds of topics. Sometimes a proverb is connected to the one before it or the one after it, but more often than not, that isn't the case. So, look at Proverbs chapter 16, verses 31 to 33 with me. I just chose this at random, be up there on the screen. It says, "Gray hair is a glorious crown. It is found in the ways of righteousness. Patience is better than power, and controlling one's emotions than capturing a city. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." So you see what I mean there, don't you? Quick-fire proverbs, one about the dignity of old age, one about patience, and one about God's sovereignty. There is no obvious connection between the 3 of them at all. It's like a blunderbuss going off, firing shots in every direction. So if one proverb doesn't hit you, well, the next one might. That's characteristic of Proverbs 10 to 31. But there is an earlier part of the book of Proverbs as well. And Proverbs chapter 1 to 9 is quite different, because there the chapters do flow like you would expect in a normal Bible book. Now, in fact, in Proverbs chapters 1 to 9, you get mini sermons in the form of poems. So chapter 5 is a poetic mini sermon against adultery. Chapter 8 is a poetic mini sermon about wisdom, and so on. There is logical connection from one verse to the next. Now, when I was younger, I used to love part 2 of Proverbs. So, confession time, I never really bothered with part 1. Or if I did, I read through it really quickly so that I could get to the juicier, funnier Proverbs in part 2. Now, you'll be glad to know I now realize that was a mistake. In actual fact, you cannot understand part 2 of Proverbs unless you have first got a handle on part 1 of Proverbs. So for that reason, this morning, we're having this sermon on Proverbs chapter 1, which will help set the scene for the rest of this series, which will focus mostly on part 2. And so when we get to part 2, that'll be in a fortnight, we'll have a series of more topical sermons. We're going to pick out various themes which appear in part 2 of Proverbs, and we're going to try to bring together all of the teaching in the book about that theme. So we're going to look at what Proverbs teaches about words, about friendship, about alcohol, about pride and humility, about money, and there are going to be various other themes as well. So that's the plan. Introductory comment number 2. I just need to define for you what a biblical proverb is. And here's my definition. A biblical proverb is a wise saying, observation, a mini sermon or quip which teaches some general truth. A biblical proverb is a wise saying, observation, mini sermon or quip which teaches some general truth. Now, that being the case, there is something we need to be clear on. Proverbs are not necessarily giving us promises. They don't necessarily guarantee a particular outcome. Let's take one of the most famous verses in Proverbs as an example. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6 says this: "Start a youth out on his way. Even when he grows old, he will not depart from it." Now, because of the way biblical proverbs work, that is not a promise. It is not a promise that if you train up your children in the right ways, they will never depart from them. Rather, what it's doing is teaching the general truth that if you bring your children up in the right ways, they are much more likely to keep them when they're older. It's a general truth. A biblical proverb is a wise saying, observation, mini sermon, or quip which teaches some general truth. Biblical proverbs will teach you what you might expect from life in normal circumstances if you choose to behave a particular way. That's the way they were always intended to work, and it's important to remember that. It's important not to over-apply them. Introductory comment number 3. There are certain techniques which Solomon and the other proverb casters use in putting the book together. And one of the techniques they use is that Proverbs is written as if to a young man. It's framed as advice from parents to their son. And it's easy enough to see that. Just look at the first verse of chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. And they all start with the words, "my son." So Proverbs is written as if to a young man who's just starting out on life on his own. He's inexperienced. He needs help. He needs wisdom. And the Proverbs are like gifts from his parents to help him navigate life. Now, that does not mean that Proverbs is not for you if you are a woman. And it doesn't mean that Proverbs is not for you if you are an old man. It's just a writing technique. It's a literary device which Solomon and the other writers use. And we're going to see that immediately as we plunge into chapter 1. Right, enough introduction. Let's get into Proverbs 1, and we're going to do it in 3 steps. Step 1, what Proverbs offers. What Proverbs offers. Now, verse 1 gives a kind of heading to the whole book. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Now, that doesn't mean that Solomon wrote literally every proverb, by the way, though the vast majority do seem to be attributable to him. And then, after that heading, Proverbs gives us a mighty offer. It tells us what it gives us if we take it seriously, if we read it and really take it to heart. Listen to verses 2 to 6. The Proverbs are, for learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding insightful sayings, for receiving prudent instruction in righteousness, justice, and integrity, for teaching shrewdness to the inexperienced, knowledge and discretion to a young man. Let a wise person listen and increase learning, and let a discerning person obtain guidance. for understanding a proverb or a parable, the words of the wise and their riddles. That's quite a lot to take in one go. So what are verses 2 to 6 saying? What is Proverbs offering people? Answer, it's offering wisdom, verse 2, discipline, verse 2, understanding, verse 2, prudence, verse 3, knowledge, verse 4, discretion, verse 4, learning, verse 5, and guidance, verse 5. And that is a pretty impressive list, isn't it? Taking Proverbs seriously will give you wisdom, discipline, understanding, prudence, knowledge, discretion, learning, and guidance. Or maybe I could put it this way. Do you want to live skillfully? Do you want to have the ability to make the best choices? Do you want practical know-how? Do you want discernment? Do you want to be able to look at a situation and understand its true reality? Do you want cool-headed good sense? Do you want to be resourceful? Well, then make the most of the book of Proverbs. Or maybe I could put it another way. Do you want to be a better husband or wife or son or daughter or parent or friend or student or businessman or businesswoman or neighbor or church member? Do you want to be better at whatever you do? Well then, make the most of the book of Proverbs. See, the whole point of the book of Proverbs is to give you the tools to live life to the full. It wants to enable you to navigate life in the best possible way. That is what it's offering. If you take it seriously, it will give you wisdom, discipline, understanding, prudence, knowledge, discretion, learning, and guidance. So take it seriously, because we need it. What is more, Proverbs offers that to everybody. Verse 4 tells us it's for the inexperienced and the young. Verse 5 tells us it's for the wise. And if you put that together, you see that Proverbs is for everyone. So maybe you're here and you know that you've made some bad decisions in life. Well, Proverbs is for you. It will help you to make wiser choices in the future. Perhaps you're here and you already have some wisdom. Proverbs is for you. It will help you to become wiser and wiser in what you do. Maybe you feel wise in some areas and foolish in others. Proverbs is for you. It will help you to fill in the gaps. Proverbs is for everyone. By now, though, you might be thinking something like this. All right. So Proverbs is going to give me wisdom, discipline, understanding, prudence, knowledge, discretion, learning, and guidance. It's going to make me wiser. But doesn't that just make it a kind of self-help book? Isn't it just like Self-Help for the Bleak by Rich Hall? Isn't it just like Fierce, Free, and Full of Fire, The Guide to Being Glorious You by Jen Hatmaker? Isn't it just like that? Well, no, it's not. The next verse shows that that is not the case. And that takes us to our second step through this chapter. This second step is the reason why we were right not to rush straight into part 2 of Proverbs before at least having a little look at part 1. So our second step this morning is where wisdom begins. Where wisdom begins. Look at verse 7. We are about to discover what makes Proverbs different from any other collection of wisdom. This matters. Verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. And there's a good companion verse towards the end of part 1 of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. It says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Let's think about those verses together. They are teaching us that all eternally consequential knowledge and wisdom start with the fear of the Lord. All eternally consequential knowledge and wisdom start with the fear of the Lord. So let's explore that for a bit. What does it mean to fear the Lord? What is the fear of God, the fear of the Lord? Well, the fear of the Lord is not so much terror. It's more awe. It's that sense of his vastness and his majesty and his preeminence, his massiveness, his bigness, and our smallness. The fear of God is the reverence and respect and the awe which you cannot help but give God when you realize that you are so insignificant and that he is majestic in every way. That's what the fear of the Lord is. And those who have that sort of respect for the Lord, they find that it inevitably changes their lives. It leads relentlessly to a life of submission to him. It leads relentlessly to a life of obedience to him. After all, if you truly understand God's glory and your own insignificance, well, then you will submit to him and obey him, won't you? The fear of the Lord is that reverence and respect and awe for God, which leads to a life of obedience to him. That's what the fear of the Lord is, and that is what we all need. However, that leads on to a second question. That being the case, now that we know what the fear of the Lord is, what does it mean to say that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. What does that mean? When people go to Bible college, as some of you have, you normally have to learn a bit of New Testament Greek. And there's one thing you have to do before you can get anywhere. You have to learn the alphabet. And you have to learn all those strange-looking letters like Xi and Psi, which are up on the screen at the moment. That's the beginning of learning Greek. And you are not going to get anywhere until you've done that. Learning the alphabet is the first principle, the first step in learning Greek. And that's what it means when Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's saying that the first principle in gaining true, consequential knowledge and wisdom is to fear the Lord. The first step in gaining that true knowledge and wisdom is to fear the Lord. The very commencement of of knowledge and wisdom, is to fear the Lord. That's where it all starts. That's the first step. Now, of course, that is not to say that non-Christians can't be really clever, because they can. And I've met brilliant people over the years, academics and others, who haven't feared the Lord. It's not saying that non-Christians can't be really clever. But it is saying that all eternally consequential knowledge and wisdom flow from the fear of the Lord. Here's the balance according to the book of Proverbs. True wisdom is based ultimately on a relationship with God. It is impossible to make proper sense of the world unless you are in connection with him. It is impossible to live life to the full unless you are actively involved with God himself. Knowing him, fearing him, loving him, it's always the first step. It's always the first principle. That being the case, there is another step we can take here which really helps us to understand the book of Proverbs. If wisdom starts with fearing God, then the wise life is the God-shaped life. If wisdom starts with knowing God, fearing God, then the wise life is the Christ-shaped life. The wise life is the godly life. Wisdom is associated with God. Wisdom comes from a relationship with God. Therefore, the wise life is the God-shaped life, the Christ-shaped life, the godly life. Wisdom and godliness, they walk hand in hand with each other. And that's why, if I just flick you back to verses 2 and 3 for a moment, you find that the Proverbs are for learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding insightful sayings, for receiving prudent instruction in righteousness, justice, and integrity. And you see it there. The wise, disciplined, understanding, prudent life gives rise to godly characteristics, such as doing what is right and just and fair. The wise life is the God-shaped life, the Christ-shaped life, the godly life. So whenever we read of the wise path in Proverbs, we're actually reading about the godly path as well. That is why Proverbs is not just a book of secular wisdom. Now, there is a flip side to that as well, and the flip side is this: the foolish life is therefore the ungodly life. The foolish life is the ungodly life. Look at the second half of verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. So fools, they despise those wise and disciplined ways which spring from the fear of the Lord. They reject wisdom. They reject God's wise ways of living. They reject God himself. And so folly in Proverbs is not just about being a bit stupid. Folly in Proverbs is all about un-God-shapedness, un-Christ-likeness, ungodliness. It's all about turning away from the Lord. And if you're not clear on that, have a little look at Proverbs 9 when you get home. We're thinking about where wisdom begins. And so to summarize, true wisdom springs from knowing and fearing God. Therefore, the wise life is the godly life, the foolish life is the ungodly life, and that's what makes Proverbs different from Change the World for a Fiver or whatever else you might read. And we need to remember that as we look at part 2. Before we move on, there is one other thing to say here. Proverbs was originally written in an old covenant context, i.e., before Jesus came. But for us new covenant believers, there is something to add here at this point as well. Listen again to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 30. It's the verse Matt started the service with. The Apostle Paul is writing to the Christians at Corinth. It's from him that you are in Christ Jesus, who became wisdom from God for us, our righteousness, sanctification, and redemption. Christ, says Paul, is our wisdom. So if you lack wisdom, if you lack godliness, there is always someone you can turn to help, and it's Jesus. He embodies all the wisdom of the book of Proverbs. He lived a perfectly wise and godly life. He died on the cross and rose again to save foolish and ungodly people. And he's always ready to bestow his godly wisdom upon us. Isn't it great that we, church, can always turn to him for wisdom and understanding whenever we need it? And actually, if you're not a Christian here this morning, well, he's willing to help you too. If you trust in him, he will turn your life around. He will deliver you from your folly and your ungodliness, and he will grant you his own wisdom and godliness. So if you never have, please turn to Jesus Christ. Confess to him all you've done wrong. Trust in him. Start to live a wise life by following him. Because if you really do that, you will find your life radically transformed for the better. Christ, our wisdom. Verse 7 is a key verse, and it calls us to choose between two ways. There is the way of wisdom, there is the way of folly. Which are you following? Do you fear the Lord? Do you respect him? Do you love him? Do you obey him? Are you wise? Are you godly? Are you trusting in Jesus Christ? Or is your life the opposite? Are you living a life of folly? Are you living a life of ungodliness? Well, may the Spirit of Christ help us to choose the right way and to carry on choosing that right way every day. That's where wisdom begins. Third step through the passage, and we're really going to hammer through the rest of the chapter now. Don't worry. I know we've spent a lot of time on the first 7 verses. We're going to bomb through the rest of the chapter. And as we do, we're going to see 2 case studies. 2 case studies which illustrate the wise life and the foolish life. So here is case study 1. Imagine for a moment that you are a young man and you are living in Israel around the year 900 BC. Whose voices are you going to be listening to? Well, the first voices are going to be those of your parents. And as we come to our first case study in verses 8 to 19, we hear them. We're introduced to the wise parents of the young man to whom Proverbs is addressed, and we hear them speaking to him. Look at verse 8. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and don't reject your mother's teaching. The wise parents speak, and they tell the young man to listen to them and not to forsake their teaching. Here come some wise words, some godly words, and we need to listen to them as well. So what do the wise parents say? What is their message? Well, basically, they tell their young person, their young guy, to avoid bad company. Look at verses 10 to 14 again. My son, if sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. If they say, come with us, let's set an ambush and kill someone. Let's attack some innocent person just for fun. Let's swallow them alive like Sheol, whole like those who go down to the pit. We'll find all kinds of valuable property and fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us and we'll all share the loot. Evil promises much. Here it promises financial gain. It promises excitement. It promises a place in the gang. You can see it all there in verses 10 to 14. But the wise parents, they strip it all away. What do you actually get from bad company? Verses 18 and 19, but they set an ambush to kill themselves. They attack their own lives. Such are the paths of all who make profit dishonestly. Takes the lives of those who receive it. What do you get from bad company in the end? You end up getting caught in your own trap, ultimately. You end up bringing doom upon yourself. The wise way, the godly way, is to avoid bad company. Now, there's a New Testament counterpart to this teaching. Now, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, Paul quotes a proverb. Interestingly, it's not a biblical proverb. It was written by an Athenian poet called Menander. But Paul writes this, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Bad company corrupts good character. And that is true. Proverbs and Paul, they're not telling you to have no non-Christian friends. They're not telling you that. But they are telling you that the people you associate with most will inevitably influence you. So if you spend much of your time in good company, it will tend to improve your character. And if you spend most of your time in bad company, it will tend to corrupt your character. The people you associate with most, and especially the people you choose to associate with most, they will inevitably have an influence upon you. And what might that look like in life? Well, I think all of this teaches that it's wrong for you to be part of a gang which is always involved in bad stuff like drunkenness and drugs and easy sex. I think it's all teaching that it's foolish for you, Christian, to be going out with a non-Christian boyfriend or girlfriend. I think it's teaching you that it's vital that your best friends are people who are going to build you up, not knock you down. That's why, by the way, you need to pray for protection every day you go to work or school if your colleagues are a pretty godless bunch. Let me repeat, Proverbs is not telling you to have no non-Christian friends. It's just telling you that the people you associate with most will inevitably have a huge influence on you, whether for good or for bad. So stop and think about the people you hang out with, the people you choose to spend time with. What are they like? Wise or foolish? Godly or ungodly? Do you need the Spirit's help to make some changes? Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. That's case study 1. And then case study 2. The first voices heard by this young man living in Israel in 900 BC are the voices of his parents. But there are other voices he's going to hear too. He's a young man. He's going to be hearing the voices of women. And the second case study in chapter 1 introduces us to one such woman. It introduces us to woman wisdom, to the wise woman. Look at verses 20 and 21. Wisdom calls out in the street. She makes her voice heard in the public squares. She cries out above the commotion. She speaks at the entrance of the city gates. So there's wisdom personified as a woman. And the wise woman speaks. In fact, she calls out to all and sundry. She shouts her head off in the road, in the public squares, in the noisy streets, in the city gates, like a town crier who's had too many Red Bulls. She's wandering around exclaiming that people should come to her for wisdom. She has wise words, godly words, words we need to hear. But it seems that the people are unwilling to listen to the wise woman. Look at verses 22 and 23. These are his words. How long, inexperienced ones, will you love ignorance? How long will you mockers enjoy mocking and you fools hate knowledge? If you respond to my warning, then I will pour out my spirit on you and teach you my words. Evidently, the wise woman has been crying out for some time, but people have rejected her. They've preferred their foolish ways, their ungodly ways. It sounds quite contemporary, doesn't it? And, she says, they're going to suffer for it. That's what verses 24 to 32 is all about. But we'll just read verses 29 to 32. The wise woman is still speaking. Because they hated knowledge, didn't choose to fear the Lord, were not interested in my counsel, and rejected all my correction, they will eat the fruit of their way. They'll be glutted with their own schemes. For the apostasy of the inexperienced will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But whoever listens to me will live securely and be undisturbed by the dread of danger. What happens to those who reject wisdom? They reap what they sow. They will eat the fruit of their way. They'll be glutted with their own schemes. And ultimately, that means they lose everything. The apostasy of the inexperienced will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. There's actually only hope for those who have wisdom, who have godliness. And that is the note on which the chapter ends. Verse 33, the wise woman says, whoever listens to me will live securely and be undisturbed by the dread of danger. That is not a promise, remember. Proverbs are wise sayings, observations, mini sermons or quips which teach some general truth. But verse 33 is saying that those who follow the ways of wisdom will be helped through their lives by doing so. And so the application of this second case study is pretty clear, isn't it? There is only one safe way to navigate life. One safe way to steer your course through life. One safe way. And it's to live according to wisdom. It's to live according to godliness. And how are you going to get it? Through the fear of the Lord, through Jesus, God's wisdom, and through the book of Proverbs. And so next time, in a fortnight, we're going to be seeing what Proverbs teaches about your words. Let's pause for a moment or two of reflection, and then we'll come to our last song.